The bridge of the Japanese battleship Musashi is a sanctuary of ordered silence, a stark contrast to the chaos it is about to unleash. Philippine Sea, October 24, 1944, just after dawn. Sunlight glints off the massive, 18.1-inch gun barrels of the world's most powerful battleship. The air is thick with salt and the faint, oily scent of machinery. Admiral Takeo Kurita stands motionless, his gaze fixed on the vast, empty horizon. His uniform is crisp, but his face is etched with the fatigue of a man who has already seen his navy broken. Piece by piece, he knows what is coming. They all do. To the west, the first specks appear in the cerulean sky. They are not birds. The low, distant drone grows into a deafening roar. American Hellcats and Helldivers from the aircraft carriers USS Intrepid and USS Cabot. They swarm like hornets, descending upon the mighty central force. The air raid alarm shrieks, a sound that tears at the nerves. The great ship shudders as its anti-aircraft batteries open up, filling the sky with black, cancerous puffs of flak. This is not just another battle. This is the end of a dream, and Empire's last, desperate gamble played out on a canvas of sea and fire. The Imperial Japanese Navy has come to Leyte Gulf to die. The stage is set for the largest naval battle in human history. To understand the magnitude of the clash at Leyte Gulf, one must first comprehend the dream it was built upon. The Imperial Japanese Navy was not merely a fleet, it was the physical manifestation of a national ambition. For decades, Japan had looked out across the Pacific and seen not an ocean, but an empire. This vision was born from the Meiji Restoration, a frantic, determined effort to transform a feudal society into a modern world power. The nation consumed Western naval technology with a voracious appetite. British shipyards built the battleship Congo. Naval theorists like Sato Tetsutaro advocated for a decisive battle doctrine, a concept that would become a sacred scripture for the Imperial Navy. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Use light forces like submarines and land-based aircraft to whittle down the advancing American fleet as it crossed the Pacific, luring it into a final, annihilating confrontation near Japan. There, the world's most powerful battleships, the Yamato and her sister Musashi, would deliver the killing blow. This doctrine bred a specific kind of warship and a specific kind of sailor. Japanese destroyers were built for speed and torpedo punch. The Long Lance oxygen torpedo, terrifyingly superior weapon. Their pilots, trained to a razor's edge, were among the best in the world, and at the heart of it all were the super battleships, colossal floating fortresses whose very existence was a statement of intent. They were designed to outrange and outfight any ship the Americans or British could build. They were the guarantors of victory in the decisive battle. This dream reached its zenith on December 7, 1941. The audacious attack on Pearl Harbor was the ultimate expression of the Japanese strategic mind, a preemptive strike to cripple the American fleet, buying time to solidify a vast defensive perimeter across the Pacific. For 6 months it worked. The Japanese military swept across Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific with stunning speed. The empire, shaped like a great octopus, stretched its tentacles from the Aleutians to the Solomon Islands, from Burma to the Marshall Islands. The resource-rich lands of the Dutch East Indies now fueled the war machine. The dream, for a fleeting moment, appeared to be reality. But dreams have a way of ignoring reality. The American fleet was not destroyed at Pearl Harbor. Its aircraft carriers, the new arbiters of naval power, were at sea, and the American industrial behemoth, which Japan had gambled would lack the will to fight a long war, was now awakening. The American response was not the negotiated peace Tokyo had hoped for, but a roaring industrial age fury. The Doolittle raid in April 1942 was a psychological shock demonstration that the Japanese homeland was not invulnerable. Then, just a month later, came the true strategic earthquake. At the Battle of the Coral Sea, opposing fleets fought without ever sighting each other, a historic first. Aircraft carriers were the sole instruments of power. The era of the battleship-led decisive battle was already passing, a fact the Imperial Japanese Navy was reluctant to accept. This reluctance culminated in the disaster at Midway in June 1942. In a matter of Minutes dive bombers from American carriers USS Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet sent. Four of Japan's finest aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Huryu, to the bottom. The loss was not just in ships, but in the irreplaceable core of her veteran naval aviators. The initiative in the Pacific had irrevocably shifted, the American strategy of island hopping began in earnest, bypassing strong Japanese garrisons to seize key airfields. And naval bases, each captured atoll, Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, tightened the noose and brought American long-range bombers closer to Japan itself. The fall of Saipan in July 1944 was a catastrophe that shook the Tojo government to its core. From its airfields, the new B-29 superfortresses could reach Tokyo. The inner defensive perimeter of the Japanese Empire had been shattered. For the Japanese High Command, the next American move was obvious: an invasion of the Philippines. This was not just another strategic objective. The Philippines were the linchpin of the entire Southern Resources area, the route through which oil and rubber flowed from the conquered territories to the home islands. To lose the Philippines was to be strangled. Admiral Somu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, put it bluntly. Should we lose in the Philippines operations, even though the fleet should be left, the shipping lane to the south would be completely cut off. If the fleet should come back to Japanese waters, it would not be able to get its fuel. If it should remain in southern waters, it would not be able to get its ammunition and arms. There would be no sense in saving the fleet at the expense of the loss of the Philippines. This stark reality gave birth to Operation Shogo, Operation Victory. It was a plan of breathtaking complexity and risk, a final all-or-nothing throw of the dice. The Imperial Japanese Navy, for so long hoarded for the mythical decisive battle, would now commit its entire remaining strength. The dream of empire would be defended or broken in the waters of Leyte Gulf. This section charts the reversal of Japanese fortunes and the strategic imperative that led directly to the formulation of the Shogo Plan. The final line explicitly names the operation and the location, setting the stage for a detailed examination of its components. The Japanese Shogo Plan was a masterpiece of tactical complexity, born of desperation. It was a high-wire act that relied on precise timing, American miscalculation, and the ultimate sacrifice. The plan divided the remaining strength of the combined fleet into three main forces, not as a unified fist, but as separate fingers probing for a fatal weakness. From the north, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's mobile force would serve as the bait. His force was built around the carriers Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitos, and Chiyoda, but this was a hollow threat after the carnage at the Philippine Sea, dubbed the Great Marianas. Turkey Shoot Ozawa possessed barely 100 aircraft, and critically, only a handful of experienced pilots. His mission was not to fight but to be seen. He was to lure the main American threat, the powerful fast carrier task force TF-38 under Admiral William Bull Halsey, away from the Leyte beachhead. It was a suicide mission, trading the last of Japan's carrier aviation for a chance at victory elsewhere. The main blow would be delivered by surface forces. The powerful Central Force, under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, was to slip through the San Bernardino Strait, north of Samar. It contained the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, along with other battleships, heavy cruisers and destroyers. Simultaneously, the Southern Force split into two sections under Vice Admirals Shoji Nishimura and Kiyohide Shima would transit the Surigao Strait to the south. Their goal was a classic pincer movement to converge on the American landing forces in Leyte Gulf and annihilate the vulnerable troop transports and supply ships. The entire operation was an intricate clockwork mechanism. If one gear failed, the entire machine would seize. Opposing this intricate gambit was the overwhelming, industrial-scale might of the U.S. 3rd and 7th Fleets. General Douglas MacArthur's long-awaited return to the Philippines was supported by the largest amphibious invasion force yet assembled. The Pacific, hundreds of transports disgorged the U.S. 6th Army onto the Leyte shores. Protecting them was the 7th Fleet, under Vice Admiral Thomas C. Kincaid. This was a MacArthur Navy built around older battleships, many raised from the mud of Pearl Harbor, and a fleet of escort carriers, small, slow jeep carriers designed for anti submarine warfare and close air support, not fleet combat. Hovering nearby was the true sledgehammer, Halsey's Third Fleet, built around the fast carriers of TF-38. Its mission was offensive, to neutralize any Japanese naval threat. Before it could reach the landing areas, Halsey, aggressive and impulsive, was the perfect counter to the Japanese plan. He was a hunter, and the prospect of a decisive carrier battle was a lure he would find almost impossible to resist. The stage was set for a clash not just of ships, but of diametrically opposed doctrines and commanders. Beyond the grand strategies and fleet dispositions, the Battle of Leyte Gulf would be decided by two fundamental, interlocking factors: a profound technological and industrial disparity, and the contrasting human spirit of the opposing fleets. On the American side, the war machine was a testament to logistical might and quantitative superiority. The U.S. Navy's Combat Information Centers, CICs, were revolutionary advantage. These darkened, radar-equipped rooms were the brains of the ship, fusing data from multiple sources to present a coherent tactical picture. American commanders could see the battlefield in the dark or through rain squalls, while their Japanese counterparts often relied on lookouts and intuition. This technological edge was compounded by the proximity of the fast carrier task force's logistical train at sea. Replenishment groups known as the Service Force allowed Halsey's carriers to remain on station almost indefinitely, a capability the Japanese could only dream of. For Japan, the technological story was one of qualitative brilliance hamstrung by quantitative failure. The Yamato-class battleships were the most heavily armed and armored ever built, their 18.1-inch guns capable of hurling a 3,200-pound shell over 25 miles. The long-lance torpedo remained the best in the world, but these were weapons from a previous era's playbook. Japanese radar was primitive and unreliable. Their anti-aircraft fire control was inadequate against the swarming American aircraft. Most critically, their industrial base could not replace losses. For every new American Essex class carrier that joined the fleet, Japan was scuttling a damaged hull or building a makeshift flight deck on a cruiser. They were fighting a war of attrition with a pre-war Navy. This material gap was mirrored by a psychological chasm. The American sailor, while not underestimating his enemy, fought with the confidence of a man backed by an unending supply of ships, shells, and fuel. Victory was a matter of time. For the Japanese sailor, the mood was different. The veterans in Kurita's and Ozawa's crews had witnessed the slow, inexorable destruction of their navy. They were no longer fighting for victory, the conventional sense, but for honor. The concept of Yamato Damashia, the fighting spirit of Japan, was being pushed to its absolute limit. It was a spirit that would soon manifest in a terrifying new form, the kamikaze, officially inaugurated at Leyte. These suicide attacks were the ultimate expression of a military culture that now valued symbolic sacrifice over tactical effect. They were a weapon of psychological terror, born from material despair. This confluence of factors, the American system of integrated technology and logistics, versus the Japanese reliance on individual weapon excellence and sheer will, created a battlefield of stark contrasts. It pitted a modern, industrial-age military against a force that was rapidly reverting to a warrior ethos, setting the stage for a confrontation that would be as brutal as it was decisive. October 23, 1944, the opening move was a disaster for Japan. Two American submarines, USS Darter and USS Dace, patrolling the Palawan Passage, stumbled upon Kurita's powerful central force. It was a blind, close-range encounter. Darter fired a spread of torpedoes that crippled the heavy cruiser Atago, Kurita's flagship, forcing the admiral to swim for his life as his ship sank beneath him. Minutes later, Dace sank the heavy cruiser Maya in a violent explosion. A third cruiser, Takao, was crippled. Kurita had lost 3 of his most powerful cruisers and his flagship before the main battle had even begun. It was an omen. The following day, October 24, the main action erupted in the Sibuyan Sea. American scout planes located Kurita's force, and Halsey's carriers launched a series of massive air strikes. The focus of their wrath became the colossal battleship Musashi. For hours, the ship endured a nightmare. Wave after wave of American aircraft, Helder's Avenger Torpedo bombers and Hellcats pounded the behemoth. It was a test of her legendary survivability. She absorbed an estimated 19 torpedo and 17 bomb hits. Slowly, inexorably, the giant was bleeding to death. Her bow dipped low into the water. Her screws rose into the air, and at 1936 she rolled over and sank, taking over half her crew of nearly 2,400 men with her. Believing the central force to be critically mauled and retreating, Halsey took the bait. Reports finally confirmed the location of Ozawa's decoy northern force, the carriers. This was the prize Halsey had been waiting for, the chance to annihilate the last of Japanese carrier power. In a fateful decision, he ordered his entire Third Fleet, every carrier and fast battleship, to steam north at high speed to intercept Ozawa. He left behind not a single battleship to guard the San Bernardino Strait. A single, terse message was sent to Admiral Kincaid of the 7th Fleet: "I am proceeding north with 3 groups to attack enemy carrier force at dawn." Kincaid assumed Halsey had left a covering force. He had not. The back door to Leyte Gulf was wide open. As Halsey raced north, the southern pincer of the Japanese plan entered the Surigao Strait. It was a pitch-black night with a low moon. Waiting for them was Vice Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's battle line of the 7th Fleet, 6 old battleships, 5 of which had been resurrected from Pearl Harbor. West Virginia, Tennessee, California, Maryland, and Pennsylvania were about to get their revenge. Oldendorf executed a classic naval maneuver, crossing the T of the oncoming Japanese force. His destroyers launched devastating torpedo attacks, sinking the battleship Fuso and crippling several destroyers. Then his battleships, firing by radar-directed gunfire, opened up at a range where the Japanese could not effectively return fire. The battleship Yamashiro was smashed into a wreck and sank. The southern pincer had been annihilated. It was the last battleship versus battleship engagement in history. But the crisis was not over. It was just beginning. Dawn, October 25, 1944, off the island of Samar. For the crews of Taffy 3, the call sign for Task Unit 7743, a group of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, the morning began with routine patrols. These were the jeep carriers, slow, unarmored, and built on merchant hulls. Their job was close air support and anti-submarine patrols, not fleet combat. Then, a lookout on the USS Fancho Bay sighted the impossible. On the horizon, the massive pagoda-like masts of Japanese battleships and cruisers pierced the sky. It was Admiral Kurita's central force. He had transited the unguarded San Bernardino Strait under cover of darkness and had stumbled upon the one thing the Shogo plan had hoped to find: the vulnerable American invasion transports. But Kurita had found Taffy 3 first. What happened next defied all military logic. The 4 destroyers and destroyer escorts of Taffy 3, the USS Johnston, Hull, Heerman, and Samuel B. Roberts, immediately turned towards the enemy and charged. It was a scene of biblical proportions, a handful of tiny ships, their largest guns a mere 5 inches, steaming directly into the fire of battleships whose main batteries were wider than a destroyer's beam. The Johnston, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. Evans, a Native American Cherokee, led the charge without waiting for orders. Evans had told his crew at the ship's commissioning, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way." He was a man of his word. The air filled with the shriek of incoming shells the size of small cars, geysers of water, stained green, yellow, and red from Japanese die-marked shells, erupted around the American ships. The Johnston fired over 200 shells at the lead heavy cruiser, Kumano, scoring hits on its superstructure and forcing it to turn away. It then launched a full spread of 10 torpedoes, one of which blew the bow off the Kumano. The destroyer was soon shattered by return fire, its bridge destroyed, Evans losing 2 fingers, but he continued to con the ship from the exposed aft steering position. For over 2 hours this desperate melee continued. The Hull and the Samuel B. Roberts fought with similar suicidal bravery. The Sammy B, a destroyer escort with no right to be in a gunfight with heavy cruisers, closed to point-blank range and fired over 605-inch shells into the superstructure of the heavy cruiser Chokai, disabling its engines and guns. the pilots of Taffy 3's aircraft, flying Wildcats and Avengers armed for ground attack with depth charges and general-purpose bombs, joined the fray. They made dry, unarmed runs at the Japanese warships, strafing bridges and conning towers. To distract gunners, they dropped whatever ordnance they had, and when that was gone, they continued to buzz the enemy fleet, a swarm of gnats harassing a herd of enraged elephants. Amid this chaos, Admiral Kurita's command disintegrated, the ferocity of the American defense convinced him he was facing Halsey's fast carriers and cruisers. The air was thick with smoke, rain squalls, and confusion. His flagship, the battleship Yamato, was forced to turn away from torpedo attacks, taking it out of the action for critical minutes. At 09:20, after having sunk the Hull, the Johnston, and the Samuel B. Roberts, and having badly damaged several escort carriers, Kurita made a decision that would baffle historians for decades. He gave the order to break off the action and regroup. The path to Leyte Gulf, filled with defenseless transports, was now clear, but the admiral, having lost control of his force and his nerve, turned his mighty fleet around and retreated back through the San Bernardino Strait. The Imperial Japanese Navy's best chance had vanished in a haze of misperception and American courage. To the north, Halsey's carriers were finally engaging and sinking Ozawa's decoy carriers. It was a hollow victory. The message, "Where is RPT, where is Task Force 30?" from a frantic Admiral Kincaid, sent in the clear, revealed the catastrophe that had nearly unfolded off Samar. Halsey had sunk the bait, but the whale had escaped and almost won the war. The scale of the Japanese defeat at Leyte Gulf was catastrophic, a loss from which the Imperial Navy would never recover. The final tally of ships lost was a stark ledger of doom. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost one fleet carrier, Zuikaku, the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor strike force, 3 light carriers, 3 battleships, including the mighty Musashi, 10 heavy cruisers, 5 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Many other ships were severely damaged. In human terms, the cost was even more staggering: over 12,500 sailors and airmen killed, including thousands of the Navy's last experienced pilots and veteran seamen. These were losses that could not be replaced. The industrial base was in ruins, and the training pipeline for new sailors and aviators had been severed. The United States Navy, by contrast, suffered losses that, while painful, were sustainable. It lost 1 light carrier, USS Princeton, 2 escort carriers, USS Gambier Bay and USS St. Louis, 2 destroyers, USS Hull and USS Johnston, 1 destroyer escort, USS Samuel B. Roberts, and several other vessels damaged. American casualties numbered around 3,000. The disparity was not just in numbers but in strategic impact. The American shipyards were already launching new carriers and destroyers faster than Japan could sink them. The men lost while mourned were part of a vast, well-trained pool of replacements. For Japan, every ship and every veteran was irreplaceable. Beyond the material losses, the battle shattered the cohesion of the Japanese fleet. Leyte Gulf was not a single, unified engagement, but 4 separate battles: the Sibuyan Sea, Surigao Strait, Samar, and Cape Engaño. In each, Japanese forces had fought isolation, their communications failing, their command structure confused. The complex, interlocking gears of the Shogo plan had ground against each other and seized. There would be no more grand, coordinated fleet operations. The surviving heavy units, including the legendary Yamato, would henceforth be relegated to fuel-starved inaction in home waters or used in desperate, one-way missions. The fleet that had once dreamed of ruling the Pacific was now a ghost fleet, its spirit broken on the anvil of American industrial power and the hammer of American resolve at Samar. The strategic consequence was immediate and absolute. The American landings on Leyte were secured. The recapture of the Philippines was now inevitable, severing the Japanese Empire from its conquered territories in the south. The oil, rubber, and tin from the Dutch East Indies could no longer reach the home islands in any meaningful quantity. Japan's war economy, already on life support, began to suffocate. The Navy could no longer protect the merchant marine, and American submarines waged an unrestricted campaign that was systematically starving the nation. In the wake of Leyte Gulf, the Imperial Japanese Navy ceased to exist as a strategic offensive force. It was a fleet in name only, its hulls hollowed out, its spirit broken. The surviving ships returned to their bases, many to Kure and Hashirajima, where they would remain slowly rusting for lack of fuel and a viable mission, the great battleship Yamato. The ultimate symbol of Japanese naval power would make one final, tragic sortie 7 months later, not in a bid for victory, but on a ceremonial suicide run to Okinawa, where it was sunk by American aircraft in a one-sided slaughter. Its fate was a perfect metaphor for the Navy itself, a magnificent weapon built for a war that had already been lost, consumed in a final, fiery act of futility. The command structure reeled from the defeat, but there were no sweeping dismissals. The architects of the Shogo Plan, Admirals Toyoda and Kurita, remained in their posts. In a sense, they were now presiding over a corpse. There was no one left to replace them and no fleet left to command. The official reports in Tokyo spoke of a great victory of ships sunk and the enemy repulsed, but the men who had been there, who had seen the Musashi roll over, who had witnessed the suicidal charge of the American destroyers at Samar, and who had limped home from the Surigao Strait massacre, knew the truth. The dream of empire, born in the fire of the Meiji Restoration and nurtured for half a century, was dead. The battle also cemented a terrifying new reality of the Pacific War, the kamikaze. The special attack forces, formally inaugurated at Leyte, were a direct result of the conventional Navy's failure and the desperate shortage of skilled pilots. The first official kamikaze attack occurred on October 25, 1944, sinking the escort carrier USS St. Lo. It was a weapon born of psychological and material bankruptcy, a stark admission that Japan could no longer compete through tactics or technology, only through the systematic sacrifice of its youth. The American sailors, who had faced the big guns of battleships with courage, now faced a new, more intimate kind of terror, an enemy who was not trying to defeat them, but only to die with them. For the United States Navy, Leyte Gulf was a vindication of its industrial might, its doctrine of carrier-centric warfare, and the raw courage of its sailors. Yet it also sparked one of the most bitter controversies of the Pacific War, revolving around Admiral Halsey's decision to leave the San Bernardino Strait unguarded. The Battle of Bulls Run, as some wryly called it, became a subject of intense debate, a lesson in the perils of divided command and the dangers of an aggressive commander taking bait. But the controversy could not overshadow the fundamental truth the U.S. Navy had absorbed the Imperial Japanese Navy's best and final blow and had shattered it completely. The path to Japan doorstep was now open, and the end of the war, though still bloody and far off, was no longer in doubt. The waters of Leyte Gulf are calm now. The oil slicks, the flotsam, the cries of the drowning all have long since faded into the deep. The battle that raged here was more than a collision of fleets. It was the terminal point of a national ambition. The Imperial Japanese Navy dreamed of an empire secured by the world's most powerful battleships, a vision forged in the fire of its victory over Russia in 1905 and pursued with single-minded intensity for 4 decades. That dream was not merely sunk by American bombs and torpedoes, it was rendered obsolete by them. Leyte Gulf stands as a monument to technological and doctrinal transition. It was the last great battle of the battleship and the first great battle of the suicide plane. It demonstrated with brutal finality that the decisive battle doctrine was a relic. Beautiful, intricate plan for a war that no longer existed. The future belonged to the Integrated Task Force, the aircraft carrier, the Combat Information Center, and the vast, unyielding logistics train that stretched back to the American homeland. The courage displayed was immense on both sides, from the calculated sacrifice of Ozawa's decoy force to the near-mythical heroism of Taffy 3, but courage alone could not bridge the chasm of industrial might and strategic innovation. In the end, the battle's true meaning lies in its finality. It was the last gasp of a maritime power that had risen with stunning speed and fell with even greater swiftness. The empire of the octopus was severed, its lifeblood cut off. The sea, which Japan had sought to command, became its prison. The echoes of Leyte Gulf resonate as a timeless Lesson that the tools of war and the dreams they are built upon must evolve or they will be consumed by the very waves they sought to rule.